Otherwise, we'll be recording this webinar. We're going to share a link to the recording with all the people who register, whether or not you can stay for the whole thing. You don't need to furiously take notes because you'll be able to go back and listen to what we've said. And we'll also take our own notes and share those out with you, especially on the questions that we hear and the answers that we give today too. So that will be a great opportunity to cover hopefully whatever you're interested in. But otherwise, we have a great list of panelists today, and we're going to be giving some background on MDA's support of Farm to School. We'll hear from Kate Siebold from MDA, and then we'll also hear from Sammy at MDE, who will talk about the interaction between the current MDA Farm to School grant opportunity and other funding that's available, because we've heard from some of you about a little bit of confusion about how those might work. And then we'll give an overview of the current Farm to School grants that are available, due on the 17th by 4 p.m. And we're very excited. So we'll give some instructions about how to apply. We'll talk about the intent of that grant. And then we'll hear from 2 previous grantees. We have a recorded presentation from a First Bite grantee and a Full Tray grantee who will share their experience getting the grants as well. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. So I am going to pass it over to my partner, Kate from MDA, to kick off the overview here.
Sounds good. Thanks, Erin. Well, yeah, hello, everyone. I'm Kate Siebold. I work for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture on regional marketing, which includes Farm to School, as well as other local and regional food systems work. And so really excited here today to talk to you about the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Farm to School grants that are open right now. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has been supporting Farm to School for the last decade or so, really, through Farm to School and early care education grants. And so some of you on this call today may have received grants from us in the past. We used to have equipment grants as well as milk cooler grants. We also used to have different grants around feasibility studies and planning for Farm to School. And then in 2020 is when we really launched our Farm to School grants that support the purchases of local food. And so that's the next kind of iteration of those grants, so to speak, is what we're going to be talking about today. And it's a really exciting time because the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has 4 times the funding to award for the fiscal year 2023 round of grants. And so we're thrilled to have all of you on today to hear about that. And we really encourage you to consider submitting an application this year. And so hopefully this webinar can help you feel prepared in how to work on that application. So this is just a quick overview of the last round of grants that we awarded. We have about $740,000 of state funding that we as an agency can award through Farm to School grants. And so in in fiscal year 2022, we awarded 26 First Bite grants and 20 Full Tray grants, as well as funding 24 equipment grants to schools. And so this $740,000 still exists in this round, but we also have an additional $3.5 million from the USDA. And so combined, that's how we have over $4 million this year. So again, 4 times the potential funding to award to schools in this next round. This is just a quick look at all of the schools that received a grant in the last round. I'll mention, if you are a fiscal year 2022 grant recipient, you are eligible to apply in this next round of grants. So this federal funding that I mentioned, it's from the USDA through their Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement Program. And this was funding that the state of Minnesota, specifically Minnesota Department of Agriculture, in collaboration with Minnesota Department of Education and University of Minnesota Extension, we applied for $3.5 million to basically support the purchase of local food for distribution to schools. And this funding from the USDA is specifically meant to be spent on food. And the MDA is using this funding and basically sub-awarding it to our schools through these farm to school grants. So there's a real focus through the USDA's Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement Program, as well as at the MDA to support emerging farms and small businesses. And so that's a focus that you'll see if you've read through the request for proposals for the grant. And a real goal of this program is to be helping schools buy from more emerging farms and small businesses in our state. So this is an important slide. Make sure you write down these dates if you don't have them in your calendar already. The applications for the farm to school grants close, as Erin mentioned, at 4 p.m. on November 17th. And as already mentioned, we have $4.19 million. So the $3.5 million that we received from the USDA will all be awarded through First Bite and Full Tray grants, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that's specifically funding to purchase local food. And our state funding, that's $750,000 roughly dollars that we have from the state to support farm to school, will all be directed to our equipment grants. And this is the link here to apply. So make sure you check out that website. And really, again, the purpose of these grants is to increase the amount of Minnesota grown and raised foods used in school nutrition programs. And through that, support market opportunities for Minnesota farmers. One other thing I'll note here is that for schools that apply and receive a grant, food purchases will need to be complete by January 19th of 2024. So when you submit your application on November 17th, the timeline is then that schools will receive their awards in January of 2023 and have roughly 12 months to complete their food purchases. So this is just a kind of a quick map of the different grants that are available, and I'll then kind of talk through each of the grants in more detail. But really, the thing to know is that there's 2 farm to school food grants available for schools to apply for. The first is the First Bite grant, that's up to $10,000, and there's the Full Tray grant, which is up to $100,000. If a school applies for either of those grants, they can then also apply for equipment funds up to $35,000. A school, though, cannot apply for equipment funds without applying for the First Bite or the Full Tray grant. So you have to apply for a food grant, and then by doing so, you can also request equipment funds. And then schools that apply for the Full Tray grant can also request second helping funds up to $50,000, which I will describe in more detail later on. So diving into the grants, the First Bite mini grant is really intended for schools that are new to farm to school and want to start small. So the grant size is $2,500 to $10,000 for a school district. There's no match requirement, and the application is a little shorter than the Full Tray grant, and it's really focused on intentional high impact farm to school efforts. So maybe it's, focusing on buying apples for next year's Great Lakes Apple Crunch and, 1 or 2 farm to school meals that you want to serve throughout the school year. Just kind of, specific ways that you plan to kind of start farm to school at a small level so you can kind of learn the process in hopes that you then can grow your farm to school program beyond that after this grant. The First Bite mini grant does not require any letters of support from producers or partner organizations. And the important thing to note here is that if you received a First Bite mini grant in the past, you are not eligible to apply for the First Bite again. You kind of level up to the Full Tray grant, which I'll talk about next. So this First Bite grant is only available to people who've never received the First Bite grant in the past. So then the other option, the Full Tray grant, is for schools that have some farm to school experience, and they're looking for funding to kind of help them expand or really kind of grow their program in some way. Or it's for schools that are ready to get started at a larger scale. So again, if you've received a farm to school grant in the past, you are absolutely eligible to apply for the full trade grant again. And if you've never received a farm to school grant, but you want to start at this level, you can also start here. So this grant will provide up to $100,000 to schools based on meals served in October of 2021 using the formula or the equation here on the screen. So look at your meals served in October 2021 times 20 cents, that's like the reimbursement rate, and then 10 months, and that will give you the amount that you're eligible to apply for. So if you served 7,500 lunches and 5,000 breakfasts in October of 2021, you are eligible to apply for $25,000. New this year is that there's also no match requirement for the full trade grant, which we're really excited about. In the past, there was a 1-to-1 match, and the full trade grant maxed out at $35,000. And so this year, with the addition of the federal funds, we've raised that max to $100,000 and increased the reimbursement rate from 10 cents to 20 cents a meal, and then eliminated the match requirement. This grant does require letters of support. So you need at least one letter of support from a producer who will benefit from you receiving this grant. And then you can also provide additional letters from producers, or community partners. If you plan to purchase your local food through a distributor, you do need to have an additional letter of support from that distributor saying that they have plans for how they will be sourcing local food. And all the details of kind of all of those different letters of support are identified in the full tray RFP. So then schools that do apply for that full tray grant are also eligible to request second helping food funds. And this is brand new this year, again, thanks to the federal funding that we have. So the distribution of what we're calling second helping food funds will be dependent on if we have remaining funds left after initial grant awards have been made. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, with support from our grant review team, will look at all of the applications we receive, figure out who we're going to award funds to. And if we look at that and we still have money left over, we will then go back through the applications to this full tray grant applicants that indicated interest in second helping funds and award additional funding to them. So again, this is only available to the full tray applicants, and it's up to an additional $50,000 beyond the full tray award. And applicants, opt in, and they actually, in this case, write in how much they would want in second helping funds. So you use the equation that I showed on the last screen for your full tray amount, but then for the second helping, you just indicate how much additional funding you would be interested in receiving if there's funding left at the end. So again, if the equation tells you that you're eligible for $25,000 through the full tray grant, you could then, for second helping, say that you were interested in an additional $5,000 or $10,000, all the way up to $50,000, and you just indicate that in your application and include that in your budget. And again, the awards will be based on the information included in your full tray application, and then the specific plans you share of how you would use the second helping food funds. So this is, again, something we're really excited about, to see, what schools can come up with for creative ways of how they would put this money to good use if we have it after initial awards are made, to have a big impact on our local food system. This, again, is also described in detail in the RFP. So if you're a little confused, I encourage you to read that section, since we know it is a little different than years past. So this is kind of an overview of what foods are eligible for reimbursement through this grant. So there's two main requirements to know. The first is that in order to be reimbursed for the local foods, that food must be grown or raised in Minnesota, and it has to be unprocessed or minimally processed. So grown or raised in Minnesota, one thing I'll note is that if you are living in kind of a border community, know that if you were to go to like a farmer's market in Minnesota and buy food, but that food was grown by a farm located in Wisconsin, it's not eligible for reimbursement through this grant. You can still purchase that food, but you can't get reimbursed through this grant specifically. So eligible food items that are unprocessed or minimally processed, that includes fruits and vegetables, that includes fresh fruits and vegetables, as well as canned or frozen, meat, fish, poultry, dairy, except fluid milk. So fluid milk is not a reimbursable item in this grant, but cheese or yogurt is. Eggs, beans, and grains also all count. So things that aren't eligible, as I mentioned, fluid milk, you can't get reimbursed for produce that's grown in a school garden. Processed products such as hot dogs, pre-made smoothies, or granola. I do want to note the hot dogs here, since this is a change from years past. Previously, when we were just distributing state funding, we did allow for Minnesota grown hot dogs to be reimbursed. But the federal funds this year have a specific definition around unprocessed and minimally processed that does not allow for hot dogs to be reimbursed. However, a brat could potentially be reimbursable if it's uncooked and in natural casing. We did receive clarification from the USDA that there could be like salt or minimal seasoning added to that brat, and that would qualify as minimally processed. So wanted to note that. We did also get clarification that tofu does qualify as minimally processed if it's made with soybeans grown in Minnesota, and it just has limited additives, so like water or specific preservatives are allowed in that. And also pickles. So if you're buying pickles that are, let's say cucumbers that were grown in Minnesota, that also qualifies as minimally processed. All of that is noted on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Farm to School Grant webpage under the Q&A section. And then, as I mentioned, items grown or produced outside of the state of Minnesota are not eligible. And then also important to note is that the food that you're purchasing has to be used for the National School Lunch Program or the School Breakfast Program. And so items purchased for any meals or snacks outside of those two meal programs would not be reimbursable either. So then switching gears, if you apply for a First Bite or a full tray grant, you can also request additional funding to purchase equipment. And so this is for equipment that you need to buy, prepare, and serve more Minnesota grown and raised foods. And you can request up to $35,000 in addition to your First Bite or full tray and second helping funds. This is the only part of the farm to school grants this year that require a one-to-one match. And that match can be either additional food, local food that you purchase, or funding that you apply directly to the purchase of that equipment. And we know that the matching piece can get a little confusing, so please call or email us with any questions you have around what that match would be required if you're planning to request equipment funds. But an example of a piece of equipment could be, you see here, like, you know, containers for and carts for being able to like serve fresh produce. That would qualify. Maybe you're needing a new, you know, slicer so that you can easily slice your apples to put on the salad bar. That would qualify. There's a lot of examples listed in the RFP, but really, again, anything that will help you to buy, prepare, and serve more Minnesota grown and raised food is eligible. So in your application, we are really looking for two things. We're looking for how your proposed project will have a positive impact on the school meals that you serve and an impact on the Minnesota's agricultural industry. So as I mentioned, projects must enhance or expand existing procurement and consumption of Minnesota grown and raised foods specifically served in the National School Lunch Program or the School Breakfast Program. So examples of what that could mean is trialing new Minnesota grown products on the menu, or through taste tests, diversifying the products that you buy from Minnesota farms. So maybe in the past you've purchased, farm to school produce, but through this you want to expand to include, Minnesota grown wild rice and beans. You can also look to increase the number of times that a Minnesota item or meal repeats itself on your menu. Minnesota has a new Harvest of the Month program, and your project could focus on highlighting Harvest of the Month items on your menu. You could be looking to add Minnesota Thursdays as a monthly feature to your menu, or just really expanding the number of featured items or meals that you serve, that are farm to school, or specifically that you're serving during Farm to School Month, or introducing local sourcing into your school breakfast program. Again, these are just examples, and we know that many of you may have completely new ideas, and we can't wait to read those in your applications. But in case you need some help, this is maybe a good starting point to think about what your project might want to focus on. And I'll also note that past successful grant applications are available upon request if you reach out to our contact info, which you'll see at the end of this. So then, in addition to the impact on school meals served, we're looking for an impact on Minnesota agriculture. So as I mentioned, foods must be grown or raised in Minnesota. And we are looking, there will be priority given to projects that will purchase from socially disadvantaged and emerging farmers. So the intent, while this is a one-year grant, the intent for this funding is to really help spur the building of relationships between schools and farms that extend into the future. And so we really hope that you take time to reach out to new farms in your area to see if this could be an opportunity for how to work together. And the priority around socially disadvantaged farmers and emerging farmers is a priority that's coming from the USDA's Local Food for Schools program, as well as a priority for the state of Minnesota, where we're really working to support emerging farmers and accessing new markets, which include food service operations like schools. So you've maybe heard the term emerging farmers come up in conversations, or you can find the definition in the grant RFP. But really these terms encompass both individuals who are perhaps entirely new to farming, as well as those individuals who've been farming for generations, but have not had the same opportunities to access traditional state and federal agricultural support programs. And so socially disadvantaged and emerging farmers could include farmers of color, American Indian or Alaskan Native farmers, women-owned farms, veterans, farmers with disabilities, young and beginning farmers, LGBTQ plus farmers, and urban farmers. There isn't a specific list of emerging farmers in Minnesota, and many farmers may fall into one of these groupings without using the term emerging farmer or socially disadvantaged farmers. And really the best way to start building relationships, or the best way to start working with emerging or socially disadvantaged farmers, is to just start building relationships in your community. And there is a site on a webpage on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's website that has suggestions for how to connect with emerging farmers, and I'll cover a few of those in the next slide as well. So one thing to keep in mind is through this grant, you can purchase local food directly from a farmer. You could purchase it through an aggregator, which could include food hubs. So like the Good Acre Food Hub located in Falcon Heights, Sprout Food Hub is in Little Falls. There's also farmers market food hubs across the state. These are places where they're bringing product together from multiple farms. And many of them have, all of those that I just listed actually have experience working with schools. So that's an option. You can also purchase from a distributor. So perhaps your mainline distributor that you're already working with has connections. These are all options of where you can purchase local food for this grant. But if you are planning to work directly with farmers, and you want to especially reach out to, try to build new connections with emerging farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers in our state, these are some suggestions of where to start. So the Minnesota Grown Wholesale Directory is a searchable website that you can go to that has listings of farms across our state who are interested in selling to wholesale customers such as schools. You can search by product. You can also use the map to look at what farms are in your area. It's also just really helpful to ask around and start learning about what farms are in your area. So where do other schools near you buy from? Where are grocery stores or restaurants near you buying from? Visit the farmers market and strike up a conversation with some of the farmers there. Similarly, you can try to strike up conversation around town at places of worship or nonprofit and cultural organizations or community events. Just kind of, start the conversation of, hey, my school is looking to work with new farms in our area to source food for our school meal programs. And I'm sure people will have suggestions of who to connect to. But you can also reach out to some farm to school supporters or connectors around the state who may also have suggestions if you're still kind of looking for farms to reach out to. And so your local SHIP coordinators are great resources. Similarly, University of Minnesota Extension educators, SNAP educators. There's many farm organizations across the state that work with farms. And so they know many farms that they could potentially connect you with. And then the Farm to School leadership team, which includes myself and Erin McKee and Sammy and many others on this call, we are all also resources to help you connect with farmers. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. The website here that's listed is the Connecting with Emerging Farmers webpage that I mentioned that has some additional strategies of how to start reaching out to emerging farmers in your area. As I mentioned, full tray applicants do need to have letters of support. So again, at least one letter of support from a producer who will benefit from your project, and then an additional letter from a distributor if you plan to work through a distributor. And important to note that this year, there are several formats for that letter of support that are available. So that letter of support could be kind of a more perhaps traditional letter where it's like on letterhead. It could also be handwritten and scanned and then uploaded into your online application, or it could be like an email that you save. And with that, that kind of covers the overview of grants. We'll certainly get to Q&A after this, but I want to pass it to Sammy Burrington from Minnesota Department of Education, who's going to talk about supply chain assistance funds. Since we've heard that there's, these farm to school grants happening, there's these other supply chain funds that schools are receiving. And so Sammy has some information on kind of perhaps how to navigate those two different sources of funding. So I will pass it to you, Sammy.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. There's a lot of funding out there right now to support school nutrition programs, which is great. And of course, many of you already know that the supply chain assistance funds have been dispersed already once, and a second round is actually coming within the next week or so if your school chose to opt into those funds, and then likely a third sometime after the first of the year. So all supply chain assistance funds actually must be obligated by September 30th, 2023. So it's sort of similar to this timeline, while the farm to school timeline is extended a bit beyond that, but still looking at next fall harvest season is probably a similar time to buy those local foods. But the supply chain assistance funds are similar also to the farm to school grants, where you can purchase locally grown and raised unprocessed or minimally processed foods, but the funding also supports domestically grown and raised unprocessed or minimally processed foods too. The supply chain assistance funds also includes fluid milk, which the farm to school grants do not. So think about that. With the supply chain assistance funds, or with the supply chain assistance funding, and then with the extra reimbursement during COVID, your nonprofit food service account balance probably is higher than in years past. So you might be thinking likely, I don't need to apply for this extra farm to school funding. I have so much to use up. But I would still encourage you all to think creatively and think through a thoughtful plan over the next year of how your school nutrition program can be enhanced and improved using all these funding streams, including the farm to school grant funding we're talking about today. Also remember, as of July 1st, 2022, USDA allowed Minnesota to increase our net cash resource limitation from 3 months to 6 months, so it doubled. So this means your school nutrition program's average operating expenses now can be up to 6 months. So that's a big increase. And then in terms of thinking creatively, I will just share one example we heard recently that one school is using their O2 fund or their nonprofit food service account funds to purchase a high capacity growing system. It's essentially a tall cart with an irrigation system and growing pots so that they're able to grow their own spinach and romaine to supply their school meals program and salad bar all year round. And it's the system that produces over 10,000 pounds of produce. So again, there are ways your school can think creatively about spending all your funds to support the local economy, your community, and then also improve your school nutrition program. So if you'd like assistance thinking through how you can use all these funding streams and use it up within the timelines that USDA is giving us, please reach out. I'm happy to help think through some of those ideas. Anything else, Kate, you wanted me to touch on about that?
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Sammy. Yeah, we just wanted to provide some clarification on all this funding that's available. And as Sammy said, it's a great opportunity to think creatively around how these funds can really help make a positive impact on your meals, as well as an impact on Minnesota agriculture and supporting our farmers. So that's great, and great to hear that the net cash resource limitation has been raised as well. So with that, I think we're now going to play a recording that we have from, we hosted the same webinar in October, and we had two folks, previous grantees, share about their experience with these grants and how they use their funds. And so we're going to play that recording. Kathy Faust from Cross Lake Community Schools shared as a First Bite grantee, and then Maria Anderson from Roseville Area Schools. So I'm going to attempt to play that video with audio, and hopefully I do it right here. I need to stop sharing for a moment to reshare with audio. Okay, so now I'm going to exit full screen.
Having me. Hello, everybody. I am sitting in our school in Cross Lake, Minnesota, which is north of Brainerd, and what would like to call God's country. And our school is a very small charter school, also public. And we have pre-K through 8th grade housed in our building. And behind me, you can see I'm sitting in our solarium, which we have aquaponics and some raised beds that we are working on growing produce to be able to use in our lunch and serve the kids, hopefully in the next coming couple months. We got the grant last year, and it was my first time really. The school has only been here since 2018. I was lucky to be able to start the food service program from ground zero, so it's been a lot of fun but a little bit challenging. So we jumped on board and got the grant, and I started working with some of the local farmers, and I was able to source some local apples so we could do the apple crunch, and we got to try the First Kiss apple that was made at the University of Minnesota, and they have them in Aiken. It's at Gilby's Apple Orchard, and he also had some squash that we purchased from them. And then I connected with a couple other farmers around the area. I was able to buy some eggs, some beef, and then I also connected with Sprout. Kate mentioned them a little bit earlier. They are in Little Falls, which is not too far from here. It's about an hour. So I really was able to get a lot of different things from them. I have purchased cauliflower, broccoli, romaine lettuce, cucumbers, tomatoes, oatmeal, blue cornmeal, watermelon. As you can see right here on the screen, everything here was from them except for the red and yellow peppers. We purchased those from our distributor, and then of course sour cream and salsa. But we were able to get green peppers, we were able to get tomatoes, lettuce, the watermelon. So pretty much it was a Minnesota lunch that day. I will have to say it is a little bit of work to do farm to school. It's not, you don't just punch in your numbers into the computer and order it from your regular distributor. So there is a little bit of work behind the scenes. But once you do get a good connection, like Kate had mentioned too, that's really is the key. If you can find, working with Sprout is much easier than probably, trying to find a farmer, but there's a lot of them out there that you can work with. The couple that I came up with that I have been working with have been very, resourceful and helpful. I really think it's definitely worth your time. Like I said, it is a little bit of extra time, but I think the outcome for the kids and to be able to say that, hey, this came from Minnesota. We also actually had some orange watermelon and the kids were like, what on earth is this? Well, it was kind of a yellowish orange and I had never tasted it before either. So it was kind of something new for me too. And it was actually pretty good. I was kind of surprised. I was a little bit hesitant, but the kids were like, when we had the next watermelon that was normal color, they were like, where's the other stuff? That was really good. So it's kind of fun to see them try something new too and kind of get out of their comfort zone. We also tried a squash that you keep the peeling on, and I kind of cut it up and put a little bit of olive oil and garlic pepper on it, and you get to eat it. You just kind of eat it. It gets kind of crunchy. It's almost like an onion ring. And we tried that last year, and a lot of the kids were very cautious about trying it, but then we did have it, and then I served it again 2 more times after that, and I was surprised on how many kids said, oh, that was really good. I'll have some more the next time we had it. So I think that that's really the big thing is trying to get them interested in things that they maybe wouldn't have tried other ways. And I really do just think it's a great way to be able to put a little bit more different things on your menu, and it does help with having the extra cash from the grant. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was great. And it sounds like you've bought some really great and a really nice variety of things with your First Bite grant. So thanks for sharing that with the group. Next, I'm going to pass it to Maria from Roseville Area Schools, who they received a full tray grant in the fiscal year 2021 grant round, as well as some previous ones. And Maria will share about their grant. So I'll pass it to you, Maria. Thanks.
Hi there, everyone. Maria, I'm our nutrition coordinator with Roseville Area Schools and St. Anthony New Brighton School District. I'm first just going to start telling a little bit about our district. We have students from 8 metro communities. We serve about 8,000 or more than 8,000 students a day across 16 different sites. Roseville and St. Anthony are really diverse, vibrant communities. I think it's amazing. We have over 82 languages other than English spoken at home. And when we look how farm to school fits into our community, we really try to use our farm to school products as also a way to introduce some cuisines that are more culturally relevant or appealing to all our households. And then we also operate 5 federal nutrition programs. So we operate all through the summer. We operate the CACFP after school program, lunch and breakfast, and some of our sites are also receiving the fresh fruit and vegetable grant program. Over the years, we have been fortunate to receive many different farm to school grants. So we have been equipment grant recipients. We've been milk cooler grant recipients. I had forgotten about those until Kate mentioned those. During the COVID years, we received the rapid response grants, which really helped us keep local foods in our food boxes that we were sending home to families when we weren't learning in school. And then the last 2 years, we have been recipients of the full tray grants, along with some equipment matching for this coming year. So when I think about, how we're accelerating farm to school or where to start, I think everyone's in the right place if you're looking towards the MDA grant. So we have certainly utilized funds from MDA. We have also worked with the USDA, and then also using private funding. There's a lot of other nonprofit grants out there that might not be labeled farm to school, but when you look at where they want their funding to go, it can be a really great place to put more funds into your farm to school programming, especially when you're looking for funds that aren't just to reimburse food purchases. So maybe marketing or different types of equipment, maybe some technology pieces. Looking at some of those funds outside of the USDA and MDA can be really helpful so that you can spend your food funds from your budget and not be worrying about stretching your budget because you've been able to support it with other marketing funds from other grants. When I think about where we've started with farm to school, I also think starting small is really key. It can be really exciting to see like big picture and just like want to jump right in there. And we've certainly done that for some things and then accepted that we should have taken a step back and started even smaller than we thought we needed to. So I think the apple crunch is always a great one, focusing on just purchasing local apples from an apple orchard one day a year, and put a lot of hype into that one day. Apples are a great no prep item. We just need to wash them, maybe slice them, and that can be a great place to start. We also utilized grant funding to host a cucumber crunch in July. And I think sometimes summer, we often think, we don't have as many students, so it might not be a great time to do farm to school. But if you're serving students during the summer, I think summer can be a great time because I often find in the admin side, we have less on our plate. And so if you can squeeze in a cucumber crunch as your one-time farm to school event of the year, you might have more time in the summer than if you are trying to squeeze something in October, because I know the start of school can get crazy. And then also utilizing resources that are already there. Harvest of the Month from MDA and Extension. Last year when those resources came out, my director and I kind of looked at each other and were like, we are no longer reinventing the wheel. We are just using Harvest of the Month materials. And that has saved us time and also helped with planning, kind of already a guideline of where we're going and what we need to purchase moving forward. I also think it's really important to look at how you're going to set up your team for success. So communicating to your school community but also your staff members. Later, I'll show a example of how we started to really break down communication for our managers of what exactly needs to happen on our farm to school days. So through our grants, we've increased Minnesota Thursdays to being the first Thursday of the month to now being twice a month. And so we've really needed to make sure we're communicating really clearly. And that's something that I've had to learn and to work on, of where these foods are coming from and how we're prepping them and what managers are responsible of purchasing and what the district is working on. And with that needs to come your training and also sharing our why. So if we go to the next slide, Kate, this is just an example of a really specific, this is this Thursday, it's Mega Meatball Thursday for our Minnesota Thursday. And this is a communication example that goes out to our managers a few weeks before. And it really just breaks down every menu item, because usually our staff are used to maybe getting all their items from your prime vendor and maybe bread from your other vendor. But they're used to everything coming from one place, and that's not going to be the case when you're working with local products. So I'm letting them know, okay, this Mega Meatball, I've ordered them the beef. How's it going to get to them? Who's bringing it? And then if there's any production notes or tips and tricks for the recipe. Going down to like the roasted broccoli and cauliflower. Broccoli had a really rough year, so I'm only able to order local cauliflower. So our managers are responsible for ordering broccoli from our prime vendor, but they're going to be getting local cauliflower. It's from a new farmer, so I noted that in the communication. I'm letting them know when it's delivered. And then also part of that why is we're including some food science notes. So why we want the vegetables to turn a little bit brown and why that's a good thing. And that brings out that sweet flavor and decreasing the bitterness of the vegetables through that Maillard reaction. We used a food science note also when we make fresh biscuits to make sure that our staff know that we need to move quickly and why cold buttermilk and hot butter need to come together. So it's not just a communicating of why out to your family and your PTO and your superintendent of the importance of all this, but also for your staff members. Kate, you can go to the next slide. Great. So something also is just communicating again to everyone. You don't want to do all this hard work because like Kathy said, it is a little bit more challenging than just entering those numbers. So making sure you're communicating out to your kids so your kids know what's going on, your parents and your staff members. And it's been really nice having that MDA grant, being able to use that as a marketing. We receive that. That's why we're choosing to spend more on some of our food items because we have support from the Department of Ag to be able to purchase our local poultry, our local wheat, our local wild rice. Also making sure you're telling your story outward so that your farmers and your producers can see what's going on. We've had a lot of farmers, farmers are busy farming and they've reached out saying it's so nice when you tag us on social media because it's an easy win for them also. They don't have to go through and make a post about selling to schools. If we can do it for them, it's a win-win for us and for those farmers as well. And then my last slide here is just a picture of some of our meals served with our local products. So we've tried some new chicken yassa and roasted sweet potatoes with a jollof rice that's in the bottom right, our mega meatball up on top, watermelon, the favorite Ferndale hot dog, and of course a turkey Thanksgiving meal in the bottom left-hand corner with some local wild rice from the Red Lake Indian Reservation. So that's all I've got from Roseville and St. Anthony.
Oh my goodness. It's so great to hear from previous grantees, and they really have the experience on the ground to be able to share some best practices of how you can make these grants work for your program. So I hope that that was really helpful, and I'm so glad we could share their presentation with all of you as well. So I'm just going to zoom through a little bit of looking back. So I work at IATP, and we've been doing some evaluation of the MDA Farm to School grants, and we've gotten some really good perspective on how grantees have been using these funds and what impact it's having on farmers and local communities. And it's just been great. And I think it would be good for all of you to hear about as well. And one thing that's exciting to me is that as we look ahead to how much money is invested in this next year, we really want to capture all of your experiences so that we can make sure that it's working for all of you, and we can share that back with MDA, but also share back the positive impacts with decision makers who might be able to make this one-time infusion of funding more of a permanent increase and continue to grow these programs. So we see here, this is super cool to look back and see what local products are grantees buying with these funds. This was pretty interesting because I think a lot of people think, oh, it's just about fruits and vegetables. That's probably the first thing that comes to mind. But it was interesting to see that for a lot of grantees, this is an opportunity to maybe access local meats and proteins that weren't maybe in their budgets without this grant funding. We heard from some grantees that that was really helpful. And then it's also helpful to access other products that aren't as as dependent on our shorter growing season. So those whole grain products, cheese, you can see apples does get its own category because that's such a good one and such a good starter option and very popular. So it's kind of in a category all by itself. So just to keep in mind, you definitely can use this for wonderful locally grown fruits and vegetables. I've seen schools be purchasing fruits and vegetables and especially storage products into February, but you can use it for other things as well. So keep that in mind because I've gotten a couple of emails about that. And if we go to the next one, you can see what the different types of fruits and vegetables are. As you can see, apples are far and away the most popular item. But a lot of those storage items like carrots or not the romaine, that was interesting. That's not a storage crop, but the radishes, potatoes, things like that that can last for a while are very popular as well. And there are a couple items that just a couple people were experimenting on. And I think it's really great to just see the diversity of products that people are trying out. And if we look at the next one, so Kate had shared, you can purchase these local items in a lot of different ways. And you can see it's a pretty even split. So there are a lot of schools that are purchasing directly from farmers. But then there are also schools using food hubs. And then there are schools that are purchasing through their already established distribution companies. So just know that you aren't limited to purchasing just directly from farmers, though it is great if you can. So just thinking about that why, I really like that idea. Just that Maria was sharing, thinking about why you might want to do this and the motivations that we've heard from previous grantees. So you can look at your purchasing power. We heard from a grantee saying they like to be able to put that purchasing power where their values are. And when they're using public money, government money, they often have to go with lower cost, but Farm to School lets them think about where it's grown, how it's grown, and apply more values than just what it costs and what costs the least. The other thing that we've heard that's really interesting when you're thinking about supply chain disruptions that have happened throughout the pandemic is that local products can actually be maybe more reliable than some of the things that have to get shipped in right now. And we've heard from grantees that Farm to School is a better bet for them right now to get some products. For example, they can get Ferndale turkey right now in 2 days, but they can't do that with the bigger brands at this time. So that's really good to keep in mind as well. And on the next slide, these are some of the benefits that we've heard from grantees. I really loved this, and this ties in with the promotion too, and documenting what you're doing and sharing it out with the community. But local products draw school leaders into the cafeteria to try school meals. On Minnesota Thursdays, a group from the administration comes in and has hot lunch at this grantee's school every month, and they get to experience the meals, and students get to see the leadership from the school district. They've even invited leaders in their community like commissioners and senators. They've had, we've heard from grantees that there's more staff buy-in and engagement to learn new methods of production and use new ingredients. And then I loved this last quote from a grantee that there's more personal buy-in, that the kids started talking to them more. They come up and they communicate what they want to see in the lunch line, and that they feel that they're more approachable, and that the kids usually only get to see the top half of them when they're serving food, but now they became real to the students. I feel like that's really powerful. And I want to get to the Q&A section, so I think I'm going to skip the next slide and just go to the opportunities for some support that I really want to highlight. So we have one more office hour next week on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. You can come and ask questions. It's the last office hour that's happening before the due date for this grant. So if you want to come and ask us about your project idea, if you have questions about the application process, if you're having difficulty making your work plan, that would be such a great time to come and ask those detailed questions about your specific situation, and we can really get into the weeds. It's an hour-long call, and And we really are willing to get into it with you and talk about your specific plan. And we can grab the link for those and share it in the chat in just a minute. We also, if you're a farmer or food hub or a community member, and you want to encourage your local school to participate, we've developed some language for you to reach out to your local school and let them know that this grant exists. It could be a way to build a new relationship with your local school and a new purchasing opportunity for you. And then we also have a website that has Q&A answers to all of these questions. We're going to host the webinar there, so you can certainly check in there for some resources. And then I think I'm just going to skip to the Q&A if that's okay, because we only have a couple more minutes left. And maybe we can highlight these resources in our follow-up email to all of the registrants. But we do have a few questions that I think would be great to address in this portion here. So one thing I saw there was a question about, can you use this funding to bring in a food truck if the food truck is serving local? And I think the answer is no. Is that right, Kate?
Yeah, I think the answer to that would be no. I'm thinking about it. So it really has to be unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So I guess unless it was a food truck that was coming in and just serving unprocessed, something like carrot sticks, just as an example, like maybe. And then if you think it was something like that, I would say reach out to MDA and let's talk about that to see if that would be eligible. But otherwise, no, like prepared meals by a food truck would not be.
And Kate, it has to be part of the school breakfast and school lunch meal
Correct.
program too.
Yes. Thank you, Sammy. And that's actually one thing I want to note really quickly is in the recording that we played from Maria at Roseville, she did note summer. And that's something specific to note for this year's round. With the federal funds, it can only be used for the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program. It cannot be used during summer.
I also we had a question in the chat about the growing equipment that you mentioned, Sammy. And I just wanted to make sure to mention that this farm to school grant funding can't be used for growing or gardening equipment. But it was the other stream of funding that you had shared.
No.
Or it frees up money.
No, neither the supply chain assistance funds or this farm to school funding that we're talking about today can support equipment other than, I guess, the farm to school grants do in a way. But I was saying, like, it's just a shift in how you pay for things. But your nonprofit food service account could pay for equipment like that if the food is benefiting your school nutrition program.
And related to that, there was a question. So the names get a little confusing. So like the second helping is part of this AGRI grant. And then the supply chain assistance that Sammy was talking about is a separate funding that does have some different requirements. So those two are separate things. And as Kate mentioned, if you want the second helping, that's something that you would indicate, and that will, the amounts allocated will depend on, if there are extra funds. It's a way to say, hey, we would love X amount of additional dollars if they were available. Correct? Kate?
That is correct. Yes. The second helping funds are part of the MDA Farm to School Grant Program. And you have to apply for the full tray grant if you want to request interest in the second helping funds. And there's, yes, you write in how much you would be interested in of second helping funds if there's funding remaining after initial grant awards have been made.
And just one last question that someone had asked about. So regarding this is eligible, the eligible applicants have to be enrolled in the National School Lunch Program already, but someone was asking about where they can find guidance for schools who want to enroll, and we did find out it's really a little bit too long of a process for a school who would want to join for this particular round. But if you're still interested in joining, Sammy, where would someone look if a school was interested in joining and enrolling in the National School Lunch Program?
Yeah, on our website, and I don't have the link right up in front of me, but we do have it available, so we could share it out in a follow-up email if we needed, or feel free to reach out to us. And actually, I mean, it's great that this grant funding is motivating you to bring the National School Lunch Program to your school so your students can benefit, but there are also a lot of other things to think through, and that's why the process is a little bit longer, because we want to make sure we set you up for success, or you're set up for success, not us supporting you. But yeah, so there are a lot of other factors that go into it too. So we'll work with you to make that happen if that's something you want to do.
And I just put the link to register for the office hours for next Wednesday. If you're interested, we would love to have you there, and we'd be able to answer questions in more detail. I see that there's a question about training available to grantees, and we do have a series of webinars that we can include in our follow-up email that provide kind of some farm to school 101 stuff about purchasing or including local foods in your menus. And we do those kind of regularly throughout the year. And we have these office hours every month. I think those are one of the best ways that you can get support as some schools, either if you're new or you're just expanding what you're doing in Farm to School. It's not only members of the Farm to School leadership team that are there, but also other grantees and other food service directors and farmers and SNAP Ed people, SHIP staff who are there to help each other and help you. So it's really been a great way to get support. And I would encourage you, if you follow that link in the chat, you can register one time and then they occur monthly. And next week, we'll really be focusing on supporting you and crafting your applications.
And I will just add to that quickly, within the next week or two, watch especially our school nutrition program bulletin, because we have 11 different trainings coming up and networking events across Minnesota between December to March, where we will be providing networking with farmers and buyers, school buyers like you, and then also have farm to school training after that. So watch for more training opportunities coming up.
And we will follow up with a recording of this webinar and a list of the resources we've mentioned with all of the people who registered. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Kate and Sammy and Nora, for being here today. And we really encourage you to apply. If you're thinking about it, now is the great year to apply. They have more money than ever before. We really are excited to see a great round of grants this year. So thanks to all of you. We hope we can see you next week and provide more support in our office hour too. Have a great day, everybody.